Hello everyone. So let's do a little bit of lighting, rendering, and camera work. Okay, so I have a scene over here. It has a tennis ball. If I zoom in on this ball, you'll see it's got its animations going over there. It does this little jump. We are in 50 frames total over here in the timeline. And on the side over here, I don't have any cameras. I don't have any lights. If I look in the rendered mode, you'll see it's completely dark. So there's nothing set up in the scene as of yet. And then there's just a tennis ball with two materials, no like hectic modifiers or anything like that. All right, so first things first, I'm going to go into the output properties tab over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll all the way down until I see this drop down here, the output drop down. I'm going to click on this folder because this is where it saves your renders. And I'm going to click there, and it's basically going to say where on your computer do you want to save all of this. So I'm going to look around. Let me say I'll select this one here, and maybe I'll save it in this folder that I've already made. If you want, you can create a new folder and you can save all of your renders in there. Like if I make a new one over here and I'll say new renders, and then I double click in there, I'm going to say accept, and now you'll see there is the entire extension all the way through. So that's where it's going to save all of your images and your videos. Alrighty, so then after that, we're going to scroll to the media type here. So you get to choose if you want an image or a video. So if you are in Blender 4.5, you'll be able to choose video, and it will ask you what type of video you're looking for. So for that, you'll want to say FFmpeg as your type of video. If you are in Blender 5, then the only option you have is video. It'll be FFmpeg by default. If you ever want to render images as well, by the way, the best ones are PNG and JPEG. So we have our options over there. I'm going to stick with video for now. And of course, we can make it black and white, or we can make it color. Then I'm going to scroll down to this over here, encoding, this drop down here. So inside of here, we have the quality. So the higher the quality, the more time it will take to render. So I recommend you go with medium or high. I'm going to stick with, let me say, high quality, for example. The video codec over here, I'm going to keep it as H.264. And then you might have an option over here if you're in Blender 4 that'll say the type of video or whatever, and you'll want to say, it might be a setting called container. Here it is for Blender 5. We want MPEG 4 as our option, not Matroska, MPEG 4. There we go. Alrighty, so now I'm going to go into the render tab, which looks like this old sort of TV camera style icon. And here we have our two different render basically engines that we can use, which are Eevee and Cycles. So Eevee is your lower end stuff, Cycles is your higher end stuff. So not all devices can handle Cycles. Some laptops chug a little bit with this. So if you have to stay with Eevee because your laptop's on the lower end, that's completely fine. But I'm going to swap over to Cycles. The device, I'm going to make it GPU compute. So then what I'm going to do to make sure this is working 100% is I'm going to go up here to the very top left into my edit drop down, and then into preferences. And inside of my preferences, I want to go down to system, and then over here. So this third tab at the very top of system, you want to go to OptiX, and then make sure you have everything in here checked. Specifically, you want the NVIDIA, and then for your graphics card, and then if you have anything else over here, you can check that too. So this will just help our device to use its graphics card to actually do all of this rendering, which makes it a lot faster. Alrighty, so we have Cycles, GPU compute. I've enabled NVIDIA and I've enabled my AMD Ryzen. my old laptop, it was an Intel that I could enable over here, so I would have that enabled instead. Alrighty, so back inside of the render properties, I'm going to scroll down to here where I've got viewport and I have render. Make sure you have denoise checked, especially inside of render. So have them both checked to be safe. What this does is it removes a whole bunch of pixels and fuzz, especially from your images, which makes them a lot clearer and crisper when you render. All right, then we have our actual settings over here. So we're not too concerned about the viewport. It's the render settings over here that are really important for us. So we have our samples. Now, your samples, it's best to go up in sort of even increments. Usually it's 128, or it'll be 256, or it'll be 512, or it'll be 1024, so on, so on. So like 2048, then we have 512, or what is it? It was, sorry, 4096, that's right. So this samples amount is basically directly proportional to the amount of time Blender's going to take going over every single frame of your video. So that is 50 different frames for my animation here, which I can see over here inside of my timeline. So that means Blender is going to put this amount of detail into every single frame. So 4096 samples for 50 frames. That's a lot of time, and that's going to take maybe 2 hours for my device to render out. If I had it at something like 128, so 128 is basically the lower end, right? I've just fact checked. You can actually dip down to 64 as well, which still keeps that incrementation going. But for the sake of this, I'm going to keep it at 128. So it's your minimum and your maximum, and Blender will sort of fluctuate between these depending on the image. So like all these frames here, this will basically be the same image multiple times over. So Blender knows it can save processing power, so it'll stick with the minimum because it's just rendering the same picture multiple times. These, however, are very different. You can see there with the amount of squash and stretch. Those are all very different images. So Blender will want to go and put a little bit more detail there because it's different stuff to render. Whereas here it can get away with using minimum processing. So for the max, let's try and have it be double. So let's have it be 256, and in the min we'll keep it as 128 just for this. Alrighty, so we have our max and our min set up. So this is very low sort of quality. If you want it to be on the higher end of the spectrum, you could do something like that, or the highest possible end, something like that. But let's just keep it to a minimum for now. So I'll stick with that. There we go. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to go into the output tab over here, this printer icon, and I'm going to scroll to the format, which is right at the top. I want to make this frame rate the same frame rate as whatever my program is. So by default, Blender is 30 frames per second. So I'm going to click on this drop down and I'm going to say 30 over there. So now that frame rate that we'll render matches the frame rate of this animation here. All right, so that's everything with our rendering essentially. That's all of our settings created. We have no camera, however, so yeah, that's going to be a little bit of an issue for rendering, and we also have no lighting. So let's jump onto the lighting, all right? So what you want to do is essentially let's alternate between using Z, the rendered view, and the material preview. So I'm going to alternate between those. There's no lights in this scene, so I'm going to Shift A, and I'm going to add a light down here, and I'm just going to stick with area lights for this example. So an area light, there we go. You can basically change its size using these controls, or you can change them using my preferred method, which is you press N on your keyboard, N for nice, and then you jump over to your item tab on the side here. So item over here, and if you have your light selected in object mode, you'll see all of its settings. So I can make it scale 3, 3, 3. And there we go. Or you could just custom click drag, or you could press S to scale on your keyboard. You can rotate using R and move it around using G. And if you hold your middle mouse button down, it will stick, which is really cool, sticking to these axes here. But I don't really want to move this one too much. I just want to have it be above the ball. It should be above the ball for the full animation. So I'm going to go to the highest point, which is there. And I'm going to make sure this light is actually above the ball, because if it's below the ball, it's not going to be lit the moment it comes up there. This part's going to be dark. So let's have the light be there. You can see here in my rendered view, the moment I move the light down, look at that, how that just crops it all out. Let's just keep this up here. Alrighty. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my green lighting settings sort of sidebar down here, which only appears if you have your light selected. So I have my area light. The important stats are the color. So I want this to just be a plain white for now. And then the power. So I've got some white power going here. Oh, he's going to get cancelled. So I'm going to have this be around 100, right? So let's do that there. So 100 power, it's your strength. Some other software call it strength. This is going to be the weakest light in my scene. It's just beaming down on the ball to provide plain white light. We are going to end up creating an entire sort of lighting system over here. So we've got, where is it? If I go over here, we've got a green, a yellow, a blue, and a red light. So we have our RGB set up, a little bit of spice. These are their powers. So the yellow is the weakest, the green is the third strongest, then we have red at second strongest, blue at the strongest. And then if I go over here, you can see what they look like from the front on view. So we're going to be working with that. And each light has got its own sort of naming convention as well. So let me jump here. We have our first light. So let's actually take this light. And what we can do in Blender, I just want to show you guys this really quickly. So in Blender, what we can do is we can go to the Constraints tab over here, and we can add a Track To constraint. So this will lock your object on whatever you select with this eyedropper. So I have the eyedropper, I'm going to select the tennis ball. So I've put this constraint on my area light, and it's now tracking the ball, which means if I move the ball around, and let me go to a view where you can actually see this light. There you go. See how that's following the ball around. So this could be cool in certain circumstances. But for this light over here, we don't need a tracking modifier because the ball is not moving in any other direction. It's going to stay there the whole way. So it's not moving forwards or backwards. It's only up and down. For other lights, though, that are going to be around here, if you want, you can have them track the ball. So if I scroll up over here, these lights aren't actually free lights. They are tracking something. So I had them track this default cube. You could have them track the ball if you wanted, but for the sake of this example, let's have it track a cube. So I'm going to Shift A, I'm going to add a mesh, a default cube. Then I'm going to scale it down using S and move it up using G. And I'm just going to move it around here. Why do I move it here? Because I want it to be kind of in the middle of the animation. So that way the ball gets decent lighting throughout the whole animation. It doesn't end up getting hidden at any point. So I'm going to do something like that. And this, I'm going to name it target. And then what I'm going to do is take this top light over here, and I'm going to duplicate it using Shift D. You can see in my hierarchy here it's duplicated. So now there's 2 of them. I'm going to duplicate it so that I have 4 new copies of it. So there we go, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then with each of these copies, I'm going to add a track to constraint. Select the target. Let's go here. Let's add a track to. Let's do the target. Let's go here. Let's add a track to the target. And the last one, a track to the target. Whee. All right, so there they all are. If I move all of them around using Shift to select multiple, you can see how all of them are tracking that ball. Very cool. Well, the cube, I mean. So, all right, we have naming conventions to uphold as well, people. So if I go over here to my reference, so the white light, I've called it light ceiling underscore W. So I'm going to double click to rename light ceiling underscore W. So the W is just for white. And I name all these lights with light first so that they show up alphabetically in my hierarchy. You could also right click and add them to I can right click down here in this empty space, make a new collection, and I could click drag my lights inside of there. That's pretty cool. But I'm going to keep them in here for now. So there's my first light. I'm going to click on the second light over here, and I have a few different terminologies for them. I'm going to call this one light back to Y. Then I'll call the next one light back G, light ceiling we've got already. Light full red, light key blue. So those are just the names of the lights. Backlights, full lights, key lights in like lighting terminology for setting up stuff like podcasts and all of that. So I'm going to pause and then I'm going to resume once that's all named. Alrighty, so they've all been renamed. Very cool, very kawaii desu. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give all of those lights their own color to match their names and their own strength to match that as well. So your strength or power that you have for each of these lights, remember in the lighting tab, depends on the size of your scene. So this is a very small scene. So I'm using very small amounts of power. Previously, I've had some that are like 1,000, 2,000, etc. But here, none of them go above 250. So I'm going to take this one yellow light here, and I'm going to make the yellow one's power, it says 175 on my reference, so I'll do that. And then for the color, which I can change by clicking on this, I'm going to have it be a slightly off-white yellow. So I have hard-coded the color for that. It's going to be FFFF8F. So that's 4 Fs, 8 F, which gives me the slightly off-white yellow. And I'm actually going to take that color and I'm going to move it back here and see how it's so easy to move because we have this target for it to track. So I'm going to have it be a little bit higher up. Then I'm going to take the light back G, the green one, and I'm going to give this one a power of, let me have a look over here, it was 200. So let's do 200. And the color is slightly off-white green, which I have hard-coded at B8FF3. So that's B8FF3, which gives me a slight off-white green. And I'm going to take that light now, and I'm going to have it be around the same sort of height as my yellow one, like that. So we're creating this sort of X shape. Rule of thumb, generally you want your yellow and green lights to be higher than your red and blue lights because the yellow and green simulate the environment, the natural environment. The red and blue, oh, I see I've made a typo over here. This typo should be the key light is blue. So the key light's blue and the full light is red. The red and blue lights are basically, the red is your warm color on your subject. So that gives you your subsurface scattering, which is like this sort of thing. This sort of detail here on flesh which makes it look like warmer. And then your blue light is to counteract that and also to create the illusion of atmosphere and depth. Kind of like how when you look out across like to the ocean, stuff becomes foggier the further you see away. That's because of all the oxygen in the atmosphere, which creates this like sort of bluish hue at certain times of the day. So we're trying to mimic that sense of distance as well. So let's take this red light. I'm going to move this down here, and I'm going to move the blue light. That's the ceiling. Let's grab the blue one there via the hierarchy there. So I'm going to select the red light. This one needs the color red, which for us, we go yoink, and I've hard coded this at FF858C. And then the power is around 200 and I think it was 25. Yep. So we have 225 there. Let me get this X shape. I'm navigating to the top and front views using my little pointer up here, but you can also do that using your number pad keys. So I can do number pad 1, I can do numpad 7, and I can toggle between those. So let me just move this to be a little bit more forward and a little bit lower than our yellow and our green. Then I'm going to select the blue key light, and I'm going to move this to the front. Move this down a little bit, and then the color, I've hard coded this value over here at A48 BFF, which gives us that sort of off white blue. You can lighten this if you want. None of this is set in stone. I'm just going to keep it as is. And then for the power, I'm having that be 250, which is the strongest light. So there we go. There's the side view that we're aiming for. So if I look at this in my render view, that's really, really cool. If I were to take every single light and add them together, like I were to do, let me give you an example. So if I were to take all these lights, let me even hide the white one. So I take these. Don't follow along with this. I'm just showing you an example. So if I were to reset them all, note how we have white light. That is because every color in the main spectrum is being combined, which creates white. So if I move one light away, you'll see they start separating those colors now. So now we can pick out individual colors. So let me reset this back to how it was. There we go. So this is up to personal taste now. If you want more red, you can always increase the power, you can increase the color, you could move this light closer. Maybe you don't want them to follow the target. See how they all follow it around. So I could move that there and the lights will follow that way. Maybe you don't want them to follow the target. Maybe you want them to follow the ball instead. So all you would do is you would go down to their constraints. You would change the target that they're looking at. But I'm actually very happy with this for now. I think the blue could be slightly closer. So let me just move that a little closer, and I'll move the red a little closer and more frontal. Yeah, that's nice. I like that. And then our environment colors over here, we can move these a little bit closer too. All up to personal preference here. I think that's fine. And what do the colors look like at the top of the animation? Okay, I can see the top is a little bit dark. Let me show my white light again, and maybe even decrease its strength a little, because I have other lights in the scene now. Yeah, I would say that's about okay. That's about fine. Alrighty, so we have our lights put together. There's one other light value that we can change, and I don't know if you can pick it up on my mic, but my laptop's starting to heavy breathe. Let's go into the World tab, which is this red world, like planet Earth icon. And inside of this World tab, the only value that's really important to us is the strength. So this is the global light that you have. The lower this goes, the darker the scene gets. The higher it goes, the more you get CSGO flashbanged. So let's bring this down. in my test, I had it at around 0. I think it was 0.7 or 0.07. I think it was 0.7. Let me just bring it down ever so slightly to darken it a little bit more. There we go. So the world is slightly darker now. Yeah, that's about okay. So we have our world darker. You might want to push it to be even darker than that, but that just gives us a little bit of ambient light. So everything's named nicely, everything's positioned nicely. The light follows this little tracker over here that we have, and we have all of our constraints and stuff. Cool. All right. I'm going to go back to the material preview mode. I'm going to also quickly show the reference for this. So here's our reference. So there is a 3-point lighting setup. So we have a key light, a full light, and a backlight, and they all shine different colored light on the one object like that. So usually we want to sort of position them in this way. So each one has its own designated color, like so. So the yellow one is optional, but I like the way it looks. So for that reason, for my complete bias, we have that there. All right, let's do camera. So camera. No camera in the scene just yet. So let's Shift A, add one. So Shift A, I'm going to scroll down to camera. Boink, there it is. All right, so let's get a good view. So just position your scene view. So I'm going to look at it maybe. Let me try and make sure the full object is in view throughout the entire animation. So this is a decent view. And however good you think your view is, zoom out slightly more like that, because this camera is going to crop the edges of your screen a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to select the camera in the hierarchy here, and then I'm going to go up to the view drop-down. I'm going to say align view, align active camera to view. Bam. So now we have our camera auto snapping for us. If you want, you can use this button over here, which lets you toggle into the camera view, or you can press 0 on your numpad to toggle in and out of it. So if I'm looking over here, press 0, bam, we're in the camera view. Another handy dandy thing about the camera view is if you have it selected and you're in this view, you can press G and move your camera around a little bit. Very funky. But what we need is we actually need to go into the green camera drop down over here. You can change your zoom inside of the focal length as well. So we can change that amount of zoom. I've currently got a perspective camera, which means that stuff is going to be distorted ever so slightly, like this. So over here, you can see how this is distorted a little bit, like looking through a door sort of hole, like a keyhole. So that's the effect that we could get with a perspective view. We could also use like a panoramic as well. There's all sorts of different views. Orthographic keeps it a flat sort of size the whole way through, like if I say zomboid over here. So see how this game is the same sort of distance. No matter how you look at everything, everything is always the same scale. It's like an isometric view. So orthographic will give you that. I'm going to stick with perspective for now. If you choose orthographic, just know that you have your scale as well. So there's my scale there. So I just change that to 10. I'm going to click drag and just have this on my perspective one at about 54 and look down slightly. There we go. I'm happy with that. If you want to change your camera a little bit more, you can always go to this orange object sort of tab on the side over here, and you can change these. You can also just press N, and there you have them easy access. But I'm happy with this for now. Alrighty. So then, with this all done, I'm going to go to the Render Properties tab, and we are almost 100% there. So I'm going to make sure that this cycles, GPU, yep. If you are in Eevee instead, let's say you're working in Eevee, you could tick ray tracing. which is going to add extra time to processing everything, but it's going to make it look all the more better. You might have other options here that say like bloom or screen space reflections or ambient occlusion, but I'm pretty sure in the most recent versions of Blender, you can just say ray tracing and it covers that all for you in Eevee. But I'm going to be sticking with the high fidelity one, Cycles, which does not have that option. It's got that by default for us. Let's scroll down to the color management drop down at the very bottom. And what I'm going to do inside of here is I'm going to change the view from AGX to filmic, which is like our movie camera quality. I'm going to change the look. So this is the amount of color, sort of saturation and contrast. So look at the difference here. This is normal. If I do medium, we're all fine. But if I do very high, see how hectic that color changes. So I'm going to stick to around medium high or high. Let me stick to medium high. Looks very decent the whole way through the animation. It's always good to check. And then after that, I'm going to go down to curves. I'm going to tick and open this. If you click anywhere on this line, it adds a point that you can click and drag. This changes the difference in your color. So look over there at the, oh my God. Okay, let's go easy with this. So I'm going to add 2 points and I'm just going to have them be like this sort of S shape. So you can see how the red is a lot stronger now. So that's essentially our color intensity there, our contrast, like in Photoshop. So let's just have an S shape going. That's about fine. And then on top of that, we've already done our sampling and all of that jazz. We're at the point now where we could do a good render, but I want to preface something quickly. If you have an object like this cube, let's say, oh, we don't want this target cube while we're rendering, right? We want to get rid of that. Hitting this I in your hierarchy to hide it, or clicking on the object and pressing H is not good enough because this camera is still on. That camera means it will still be seen when you render. If I render this now, I will still see that cube. You want to actually switch off the eye and you want to switch off the camera as well. So you can just, like, if you press H or Alt H to show, it's not good enough. You also need to switch off that camera icon too. That'll remove it from the render entirely. So that is now, it's basically non-existent. It's a ghost, it's a spook. I'll give you an example. All right, here's your example. So this is a lowest possible render setting I could configure. Like this is less than 128 by 256. This is the lowest one that I could go to. I think it was 64 by 128. So there's our ball. Very quick scene. Looks all good, right? But when we look at the video, look at that. Do you see how that light there sort of cuts? We don't want that. What that is doing over there is basically this. So see how I have an area tracking light and I have an area childed light. So I had 2 lights over here that I had disabled using the eye, but not using this render camera as well, which meant when I rendered, right, in this example animation over here, these 2 lights were following the ball, which is why you see them randomly cut in and out, because they weren't actually hidden. So you want to make sure that you have that camera disabled as well. So this was just a white light that had a tracking constraint on it, and this was another white light that instead of having a tracking constraint, I actually childed this light to the ball, which I did by selecting the light, shift selecting the ball, and then going Control P to child it. So basically it just follows. These 2 lights were giving me issues in the render, as you can see over there, with how they cut. So make sure that when you are putting all of this together, you use that camera icon to disable stuff you don't want to see in the render. So that target is completely disabled. There we go. So with that, we are finally good to render. Remember that if you decide to render now, it's going to do it as a video. You go to the output tab, you have your scroll over here, media type. We can change it to image, we can change it to video. I'm just going to render out an image as an example. Let me do it on frame, let's do it frame 16, for example, right? So it's going to render this frame for me. So I'm going to go render at the top, render image, and you can see Blender running through these samples over here. There's my image busy getting rendered. There's the frame that I had my playhead on. So the playhead being this down here that I can click drag around. So it's busy rendering. I hear it heavy breathing. It's doing it really quickly. There we go. So that's done. So there's my image. If I want to save this, it should save by default, but just in case it doesn't, you can always go image, save as, and then you can name it and it will save it wherever you want. So I could go, let me go here, let me go here, 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 here. Sorry, it changed my order for me. That was a bit cooked. Blender projects, videos, new renders, and I could name it and I could save it in there if I wanted. If you want to render the full animation, take your playhead to frame 0 just to be safe, or even 1, and then I will swap this from image to video, and then I'll say render animation. And the moment you do that, it's going to go through the entire video. The one that I showed you took about 20 minutes. This one would probably take the same. And remember, if you want to change your quality, you can always go to your render tab on the side and change your samples up. But there you go. That will give you your rendering. So remember 0 for your camera, and then clicking on it and then pressing G lets you change the angle. Your settings over here let you change the quality. And then we have our lights with all of their powers and strengths. Cool. You are officially a render guru. Ooh. And if you're still confused with stuff, you want extra revision, yes, this is for an older version of Blender, but I also recommend this Keelan John, who has 2 different tutorials over here. So he's got Blender Beginner Tutorial, Lighting Tutorial, Blender 3.4, and then Blender Beginner Tutorial, How to Render in Blender 3.4. These are also really cool little vids. I recommend you watch them back to back if you want extra practice or like nailing this in kind of. So there we go. Cool stuff. Whoop!